This chilling CCTV footage shows moments before 15-year-old Keelan Wilson was brutally hacked to death by some masked men. His murder was so vicious that an officer said that he had never seen such horrific injuries in his 6 years in service. A witness who saw the entire horrific attack described it as similar to piranhas feeding. But who is behind this gruesome murder and why did they do it? Let's look into the story behind this final footage of the teen getting stabbed 43 times for switching gangs. Those who knew Keelan Wilson described him as a loving, caring, and generous boy who had his whole life ahead of him. His grandfather said that he was an angel who would have even cut his own hair to raise money for charity. Keelan also loved cars and music and had dreams of going to university and becoming an architect.
He was really into music, wasn't he, and like into DJing. He was like DJing with his dad at Pride on Sunday. He used to be into dancing and things like that, obviously.
Keelan lived with his family at an area called Mary Hill in Wolverhampton, UK. When this tragedy happened, Keelan and his family were planning to go for a vacation in Egypt before he could start college. On Tuesday, May 29, 2018, at around 11 p.m., police were alerted to a group of boys fighting at Langley Road near Keelan's home. When they arrived, they found Keelan bleeding out on the ground with multiple knife wounds. He was immediately rushed to the hospital where the doctors tried everything they could to save his life, but sadly, it was no use. Keelan was pronounced dead at around midnight. Keelan's murder shook the entire community of Wolverhampton as they struggled to understand why anyone would want to hurt such a nice and kind boy. His family was especially devastated and called for justice to be done for their son.
Obviously, Keelan's just 15 years old. He's still a baby. Nobody deserves anything like this to happen to them. Keelan was a really clever boy. He left school, his primary school, with all level 5 stats. He had a bright future ahead of him. Everybody's just completely devastated. I just didn't ever think this would happen to my son.
A murder investigation was immediately launched as the police tried to figure out what had happened. But the investigation would not be that easy.
15-year-old boy died following a stabbing in Wolverhampton. The young victim has now been named as Keelan Wilson. Police were called to Langley Road, Mary Hill, just after 11 p.m. following violence between a group of youths. The teenager was taken to hospital with serious injuries, but was confirmed dead a short time later. Part of Langley Road and surrounding routes, including Strathfield Walk, remain cordoned off today while investigations are carried out.
All investigators knew at that time was that Keelan and a friend were sitting inside a cab when they were attacked by a group of masked youths. There was even CCTV footage that showed the group running from the crime scene at around 11:03 p.m., but it was too dark and the video was very low quality.
Yeah, the ongoing investigation now obviously been going on for some time, since May 2018. It's been a difficult, long, complex investigation. Obviously, it was a little bit tricky because the actual incident itself took place in the hours of darkness. So some of the CCTV we've got around the actual offence itself was sort of grainy, couldn't make out facial imagery or anything like that at all. We did have some better CCTV in relation to some other disorders from earlier on in the day in the town centre, where we could see clothing and that sort of thing, but ultimately the investigation wasn't able to prove who was involved in those disorders.
Police had arrested several teens as a part of the investigation, but they were all released without any charges being brought up against them. After a year had gone by without any progress on the case, Keelan's mom, Kelly Ellitz, began getting desperate and feeling like the police were not taking her son's death seriously.
If people can come forward, obviously West Midlands Police need all the help that they can get. Anything that, no matter how small it is, to just speak to the police.
In November 2019, a year and a half after the gruesome murder, police announced that they had arrested 3 men in connection to the crime. These men included 18-year-old Tyreek King, Zanae Pennant Phillips, and Nahimi Tampo. Police would then go on to arrest another man by the name of Brian Sasa, who was 19 years old at the time. Interestingly, none of these 4 had been on the police's radar before this brutal slaying, and they all denied having anything to do with Keelan's murder. But the horrifying truth of what really happened would soon be unveiled. All 4 suspects were charged at Wolverhampton Crown Court in May 2020, 2 years after Keelan's death. The prosecution said that there was evidence to suggest that this was a gang-related crime, and Keelan, despite his young age, had become embroiled in gang culture by 2018. Apparently, Keelan had been a member of the Wolverhampton gang called the V3 before he reportedly switched sides to a rival gang called V2. The prosecution believed that the 4 defendants, who were members of the V3 gang, had killed Keelan as retribution for daring to change sides. The court heard that on the day Keelan was murdered, a leading member of the V3 gang had been released from prison, which, according to the prosecution, was not a coincidence. The group had reportedly gathered in a house before leaving together in a cab to an area in Wolverhampton where they expected Keelan to be, and jointly assaulted him. The prosecution used fingerprints and DNA evidence, CCTV footage, phone records, and witness accounts to make their case against the killers. One of the witnesses was actually Keelan's dad, Gary Wilson, who told the jury that one of the suspects, Nahimi Tampo, who had actually been Keelan's friend, but the 2 fell out. Gary said that Nahimi had apparently sent Keelan some threatening text messages in early 2018. They were unpleasant. There was only one text in particular that referred to his mom. She had a newborn son. It was something about going down to his house and mentioned his granddad and brother. Keelan showed me and he was not happy about it. It said they were going to go into the house and do stuff to his granddad and brother. Gary also told the jury about a chilling incident that happened in February 2018. He and Keelan were driving around the neighborhood in his van when they came across Nahimi. Keelan got out of the car to talk to him, but the 2 got in a huge confrontation that resulted in Nahimi pulling an axe from his bag. He was just saying to Keelan to come around the corner. Nahimi had a JD bag around his shoulder. He kept pulling it off and saying, "Come around the corner," to Keelan. He took whatever he had out in his bag. I could see what was in the bag. It was an axe. When he took the axe out of the bag, I jumped on him. We went to the ground and the axe fell to the floor. I can't remember what he did, but I grabbed the axe and took it to my van. This account was, however, challenged by Nahimi's defense lawyer, who claimed that Keelan was the one who had produced a machete and slashed Nahimi across the face during the incident. Gary denied this, insisting that it was in fact Nahimi who had an axe. Now, while Gary was able to prevent a tragedy that day, he had no idea of the horror that was about to come. On May 29, 2018, the jury heard that there had been several violent clashes around the city that led up to Keelan's murder. The first clash happened at around 3:30 p.m. at a barber shop in the city center, where suspected V3 gang members attacked one of Keelan's friends. The violence spilled out into the streets where CCTV cameras captured masked youths brandishing machetes in broad daylight. Keelan was not initially at the scene, but he was dropped off a short while later at a nearby street to go check on his friend. This CCTV footage shows him walking to his friend's house before 2 men suddenly appear out of nowhere and started chasing him. One of the men even fired a shot at him, but luckily he missed and Keelan was able to get away unscathed. But things were not over yet. Later, at around 11 p.m., Keelan was reportedly driving with a friend along Langley Road when their car broke down. They tried to fix themselves, but they couldn't, so they asked someone to call a cab for them. As the cab was pulling up, a witness testified that 4 masked youths came out of nowhere and started walking towards Keelan, calling his name. At first, the witness said that she didn't think much of it and thought that they were friends. But then, one of the youths shouted Keelan's name in a way that sounded much like a whooping war cry that's intended to get someone's attention. The masked youths then pulled out some machetes and other weapons, and they started running towards Keelan. By this time, Keelan and his friend had gotten inside the cab, probably hoping that they would be safe there, but they weren't. The deranged killers reportedly struck the cab to stop it from moving, and then yanked open the back door and dragged Keelan outside. The jurors heard that Keelan was attacked savagely with a variety of weapons as several witnesses watched. One witness described the attack, saying that it was carried out as a pack and in a horrendous and brutal manner. Another witness would even say that it was like piranhas feeding. The prosecution said that the vicious attack lasted for only 20 seconds, but within that small space of time, Keelan had sustained 43 knife wounds. One of the detectives, who were among the first to arrive at the scene, said that this was a particularly horrific crime because of the level of injuries that Keelan had suffered and the fact that he was only 15 years old. There are very few murders murders that we have dealt with here where the injuries are that horrific. It really is a standout crime in that respect. The prosecution said that while Keelan was brutally murdered, his friend was left unscathed and fled from the scene, making it evident to authorities that Keelan was the only target. The cab driver only sustained a minor cut on the arm. Keelan's mom, Kelly, also testified in court, saying that earlier that day she had taken Keelan to have his hair cut at a barbershop in Bushbury before heading to the city center to pick up some parcels. But when they got to the city center, Keelan received the news about his friend being attacked in another barbershop in town and asked his mom to take him there, the incident that was captured on CCTV. The two then got into a heated argument as Kelly did not want him to go, but he kept insisting that he wanted to check on his friend, so she dropped him off. Kelly said that the next time she heard from her son was around 8:20 p.m. when he texted her to say that his battery was at 1%. So if she texted him and it didn't go through, it meant that his battery had died. When Keelan was murdered, Kelly said that she was in her bedroom when she saw blue flashing lights go past the house at around 11 p.m. that night. Despite her neighbor telling her that it was not Keelan, Kelly said she kept walking over there because she thought that if it was not her son, then it must be someone her son knew that had been run over. The prosecution then asked her at what point she knew that it was indeed Keelan, and she said that she saw an item of her son's clothing and quickly realized that he had sustained a number of wounds. Kelly went on to describe how she traveled in a different ambulance to the hospital, where doctors gave her the devastating news that her son's life was now over. Heartbreakingly, she would learn that Keelan's last words had reportedly been, "Tell my mom I love her." Kelly told the court that Keelan was her whole world and that the night he died would haunt her for as long as she lived. "My world will never be the same. I know there's no light at the end of the tunnel. My 15-year-old is never returning for me. He is never going to settle down, get married, and have children. Everything was taken away. How do you live with that?" Keelan's dad, Gary, said that there were no words to describe what he felt, but said that he torments himself thinking of his son's brutal murder. "I saw my son lying there dead. When I close my eyes, that's what I see." He recalled the moment he found out about the murder, saying that Kelly had called him to say that Keelan had been stabbed. There were several key pieces of evidence linking the four suspects to the scene and to Keelan. The hemi-tampo was found in possession of clothing containing Keelan's blood the day after his death, while the DNA and fingerprints of Brian Sassa and Zanae Pennant Phillips were found on the door handles and windows of the cab they ambushed.
Yeah, forensics have been of great assistance in this operation. Zanae Pennant Phillips had his handprint on the vehicle itself, the taxi in which Keelan was attacked. We have some DNA on some clothing relating to Neely Tampo, and Brian Sasso was also linked to the taxi forensically as well from one of the rear door handles.
Police also had found a rap song on Ahimi's phone that reportedly had some lyrics that talked about stabbing and killing people, while referencing the name K-Sab, which was Keelan's nickname. The trial went on for 13 weeks, after which the jury only deliberated for 2 hours before finding all 4 men guilty of Keelan's murder. Before handing down the sentences, the judge described the murder as a shocking, planned execution of a 15-year-old child, saying that the number of defensive wounds that Keelan had suffered indicated to some extent that he would have been conscious and suffered during the attack. 3 of the killers, Brian, Nahimi, and Tyreek, were sentenced to a minimum of 18 years in prison, while Zanae got a slightly reduced sentence of 17 years as he had no previous convictions. What do you think about this case? Let me know in the comment section, and be sure to like and subscribe for more videos.